Good day once again, Dr. Yakub here, Wildlife Hospital Abuja. Today in Health Series Talk, we're going to talk about a disease we hear about commonly, diabetes mellitus. I'm sure everyone somewhere, sometime, would have heard or seen people who have diabetes or will have heard about it. And we want to just discuss it so that we have some level of information related to that, so that if we have a relative or anyone or yourself, you at least will be able to know what is happening with you and how to manage yourself. That's the whole idea behind this talk. So, what is diabetes mellitus? Diabetes is a condition where, for some reason, there is too much sugar flowing in your bloodstream. Too much sugar, which is also called glucose, flowing in your bloodstream. Now, why does this come about? How does this come about? The basic reason why diabetes occur is because for some reasons there is either total absence of insulin or there is relative absence of it. What it means is this. The relative absence means that, okay, either you're not able to produce insulin enough for yourself, or you're producing but the insulin is not active. Now, what is insulin? Insulin, it's a chemical, we call it a hormone, that is produced by an organ in the body called pancreas. This organ produces this insulin in response to intake of sugar in any form, glucose. Anytime we take anything that results into production of glucose, in specifically carbohydrates, or anytime we take carbohydrates, which may be pounded yam, gari, eba, tuwo, rice, any form of carbohydrates, usually the body digests it and produces sugar. That's the functional unit of carbohydrates, or glucose as we call it. Now, this glucose usually in the body does not have access, cannot enter your body cells unless the door through which it enters is opened. In other words, we call them receptors in the cells. So the key to open that door for sugar to enter your cells, for you to have energy to function as a human being, that key is the chemical called insulin. So when you do not have insulin at all, or the insulin that you produce in that organ called pancreas is not enough, and you eat or you ingest anything that produces sugar, you find out that the sugar is not able to enter your cells, and therefore it will be floating around in your blood. So it circulates all over the place until it gets to your kidneys. When the kidney senses that the sugar in your body is too much, it begins to secrete it in the urine. And so that is why most people who have diabetes discover that they are excreting sugar in the urine. So basically, that is what brings about the condition called diabetes, the absence or the inefficiency of that chemical called insulin. Now, how does this problem come about? What leads to diabetes? Many people probably have this erroneous belief that it's eating sugar or eating carbohydrates as it were that brings diabetes. No, it is not eating too much sugar or eating too much carbs that actually produce diabetes. Rather, diabetes only gets worse when you already do not have insulin production and you expose yourself to sugar, basically. So it's not sugar that causes diabetes, but sugar makes it worse. What are the things that people who have diabetes, how do they get to know? Unfortunately, in the very beginning, most people who have diabetes don't know, because it creeps in very gradually over a long period of time, or sometimes depending on lifestyle and depending on the time we're dealing with. So, but before I discuss the specific symptoms, let me say this. There are two major types or two major ways this diabetes may arise. One is a situation where, for some reason, someone is born with a pancreas, that organ that is not able to produce insulin at all. That type, we call it type 1 diabetes. and it's common, and that is the one that is common in young people. The person has a problem for some reasons, in most cases, self-destructive problem. We call it autoimmune destruction of the pancreas. And so the person is not able to produce insulin right from young age. So we call that one type 1. The second type is the one that actually creeps in gradually over time, and that is what is called type 2. The type 2 seems to be the common one, and that is the one that is related to lifestyle. That is, if over time you particularly you eat recklessly, you get obese, you sit a lot of times, you don't do exercise, over time what happens is that as you ingest food, as you take in food, particularly carbohydrates, carbohydrates are meant to give us energy for our daily activities, including this discussion I have with you. I'm burning carbohydrates. Now, where I do not burn them and I just ingest them, what the body gets, the impression my body will get is, okay, I'm perhaps eating for the future since I'm not utilizing the energy I'm taking. So the body stores it somewhere as fat. And so over time, you get obese. As you get fatter and fatter, the fat cells, as they get distributed all over the body, the fat cells eventually get to your cells, that is to the body cells, and clock the lock that insulin is supposed to open. Insulin is the key, and then the lock gets jammed. So when insulin eventually comes to that cell, because of fat, it's not able to open up that cell for sugar to enter. So over time, you develop what is called insulin resistance. And it is this insulin resistance that now develops the type of diabetes we call, or leads to the type of diabetes we call type 2 diabetes. And that's what we see most commonly. And in most cases, this arises over time. Most people develop that in their late, maybe third decades of life. Though these days, because of again, even young people are getting more and more sedentary, they're getting more and more reckless with lifestyle, no exercises, they're mostly indoors and all of those things. So some of these types or this type of diabetes that was originally seen in the older people, it's now becoming common amongst young people as well. So by and large, it is lifestyle related, this type of diabetes. So what are the symptoms people who have diabetes experience? As I said, because sometimes it is mostly quiet, but by the time it gets worse or bad enough, there are three classical things that people who have diabetes may experience. One is you may see yourself urinating too frequently, even when you're not taking as much fluid as usual. And in most cases, this urine is in large volumes. You'll be urinating a lot in large volumes. Now, because you're urinating in large volumes, you're losing body fluids. And so you see yourself getting a lot more thirsty. And so you're likely to be drinking a lot of water. So that's the second symptoms. With urination, constant urination or frequent urination, you have the desire to drink a lot of water. So you see your lips or mouth drying all the time. The other thing that may happen is that you may just see yourself, though you are eating, but you're hungry all the time. And the reason for that is because the food you are eating is not really necessarily getting into your cells, but it is just floating around. So it's more or less like a condition of scarcity in the midst of plenty. So you see yourself eating a lot, yet you are hungry most of the time. Now, tied to that, tied to the fact that your body cells are not getting the glucose you are eating, ingesting, rather you're throwing it out through the urine, is the fact that you may see yourself actually losing weight unexplainably over time. And so these are the cardinal things that we commonly see. But sometimes the very first time someone who has diabetes get to know that he or she has diabetes is a collapse. The person's sugar goes so high, while he or she is doing his normal thing, it just collapses somewhere. And that is terrible. Usually by the time it gets there, it could be 50-50. Okay. So these are the things. Now, how do we manage diabetes? Well, the first thing is if you have any one of these symptoms that I mentioned, or you just experience extreme weakness every now and then, you're just extremely weak, you're eating, you're hungry all the time, you're extremely weak, and you know you don't have any other medical condition, it's good you go to a hospital and check out yourself. More importantly, and more particularly, if you have a family history of diabetes, that is, if particularly first degree relatives are diabetic, maybe brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers, uncles, and the rest of them. And again, if you know you don't trust your lifestyle, you sit a lot of time, you don't do exercise, you eat recklessly, and particularly you eat a lot of carbohydrates, and then you tend to have any one of these symptoms, it is very necessary you check yourself out and be sure that you do not have diabetes. And there are various tests that can be carried out to know. When the diagnosis is made, well, how do we treat diabetes? Of course, depending on the type. If it is type 1 diabetes you have, in most cases, the only way you can be treated is using insulin. And that insulin has to be used probably throughout your lifetime because the pancreas that produces the insulin is probably not efficient in that sense. If it is type 2 diabetes, depending on the severity, most of the time there are measures that are taken in managing that situation. Of course, first and foremost, you'll be advised to modify lifestyle. In this case, watch out what you eat. You have to do a lot of exercise. You have to perhaps avoid certain types of foods, to ensure that, yes, you do not unnecessarily expose yourself to so much sugar that you already have that is not entering your cells. And so sometimes beyond the lifestyle modifications, you may be given tablets to assist you, especially where lifestyle modifications have failed to control your sugar level. So in this case, you might be given tablets. We call them oral hypoglycemic agents. But sometimes the tablets alone don't do anything, especially where your situation is really very bad. You may have to be given insulin to supplement or complement the lifestyle modification or the tablets you may be given, or sometimes a combination of the whole three to be able to get your sugar control. But by and large, however it goes, we need to understand that diabetes, especially the type 2, can be prevented actually, or sometimes can be reversed depending on what led you into it in the first place. But generally speaking, once you live healthy, eat healthy, then you are more unlikely, okay, as compared to the other person who eats recklessly, lives a very sedentary lifestyle. If you were to compare you that does exercise, eat well, drinks a lot of water, vegetables, with the other person who eats recklessly, you are less likely to develop diabetes as compared to the other. So, to a very large extent, it is possible to prevent type 2 diabetes. It's possible to reverse it. It's also possible to treat it. So, anyone who has a history of diabetes in his family, anyone who does not trust himself as far as lifestyle is concerned, please go check yourself out. And if it is diabetes, approach the appropriate person. Don't reject it as we commonly see. Otherwise, what you don't know, as they say in this case, diabetes can actually surprise you. As we say, it's one of those silent killers we see around. Thank you very much.